It's pretty interesting, man. I haven't really processed it, but I mean, we're going to be talking openly and publicly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of filter in some case, right?
Right.
Man, this has been fun to read. I'll tell you what. I definitely had to go back quite a few times, like I was just telling you.
Yep.
Because I think I have this weird tendency of reading into information more as like a human nature aspect rather than like hard details. So most of my notes are kind of like the people oriented. It's kind of more geared towards who they are, kind of not where their role was generally, but where their role was in their head. Like what was their conscience telling them?
Yep.
Because I read into a lot of the character of some of these guys, even the enemies.
Right.
Very interesting.
They are.
Very interesting.
They're very interesting.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the more difficult things when I was writing the book was sort of the ambiguity of these British generals. There's a lot that's known about them when they were on American soil, but when they returned home, because this book, the central focus of it is on the last days of their lives, a lot of them lived very private lives.
Yeah.
So they weren't very public about details that were going on, especially Henry Clinton and William Howe, two of the British generals.
Definitely.
They were very, very quiet and private. When they came back, they still did stuff for the British military, but nothing like they did when they were in America. Can I borrow your lighter?
Yeah.
You get that around? Thank you.
Yeah. So be wary with that clicker. It might want to jump
And
out on you.
just in case our audience is curious, this is a Davidoff Year of the Rabbit limited edition. I've had a few of these. Quite delicious cigar, I might add. Okay, what's going on with this lighter? Oh, there we go. Oh, it's a nice little torch. Don't take much to light this either.
Yeah.
So, what was your favorite part of the book, Tom?
I definitely really like Thomas Paine. And I definitely jumped back to him many times. I almost kind of wanted to like always reference him in some sense. Like where was he in all of this? Like it would have been so cool to have been like his secretary, I guess, or somebody that kind of follows his shoes around, like that Tom character for Alexander Hamilton.
Ah, yes.
Like what would Tom be with Thomas Paine? Right. That'd be a really cool one.
It would be.
But the one thing that I think that I really the one person that I related to the most with was Jefferson. Like especially the part I definitely wrote a note about this, about him having his clock in front of the foot of his bed.
Yep. Because, that is factual information.
And yeah,
he had an alcove bed, and there was a clock that sat at the foot of his bed. And I've been out to Monticello multiple times, many times, as a matter of fact. That is the bed that Thomas Jefferson actually passed away in. But that alcove bed with that clock on the end of it, indeed was a reminder for him daily, that time was quickly passing him by in his life.
Like you said, mortality now more than ever seemed imminent. I had to write that down because that's a wave. This guy was definitely a thinker.
Yes.
And I definitely related to him in this sense because almost immediately at the foot of the bed, as soon as I opened my eyes, the wave of thoughts already start coming in. And this guy wanted to structure his initial thoughts, which is really interesting because I could kind of relate. I write a lot of notes, try to figure things out, and preemptively, so that when I come across, I always try to solve the riddle. And so when I get a reminder like that in the morning, it's almost like this kind of like initial structure. It like starts this discipline to the morning. Right. So the fact that he has this clock, at the foot of his bed to remind him of his mortality. Yep. Is a really crazy way to start the beginning of your day. But when you're a thinker, that kind of leads to this open-mindedness that he really chased.
Right. And Jefferson, like you said, I mean, as you so correctly pointed out, he was a thinker. Some of his thoughts weren't always original, but Thomas Jefferson was very unique with a lot of things. And then kind of going back to the clock that he had on there. Now, I don't know if that was something that Thomas Jefferson actually would have thought. I sort of imported that into the story to try and create a little, interest for the reader. But Jefferson, he was a deep thinker. I mean, especially late in his life. One thing you have to remember is the way these people communicated was through letters.
Yeah.
You and I today, we have our cell phones, typewriters, things like that. You got to think about it. When these guys took out a sheet of paper, they had to do, as you said, they had to sort of mentally look at that piece of paper and say, what am I going to write on this? How do I want to structure this? What am I going to write on here? Because they would write it without making really very many errors. Every once in a while you'd see a little emendation there where they would correct something. But their thought process, the way they wrote, it was so beautiful. And Jefferson was among those, one of the most brilliant men of that time period.
Yeah.
But you brought up Tom Paine, and I love Tom. We could talk about Tom for quite a while.
Yeah.
He did a lot of brilliant things, but he very outspoken. Tom, one of the things that I admire probably most about Thomas Paine was the fact that he never backed down to anybody. Now, I know when you read his chapter, he got into some trouble later in life.
Yeah.
He was
He
very
was almost
independent.
outcasted.
He was outcasted when
Yeah.
Tom Paine came back to America. I don't want to call him Tom because that was actually a name that they ridiculed him with.
Right.
He always wanted to go by Thomas, so I'll correct myself there. But when Thomas Paine came back to America, he was a hated man.
Yeah.
All the luster and all the great things that he did when he wrote The American Crisis and things of that nature that really sort of ignited the revolution in America, people forgot about that.
Definitely.
And when he got under George Washington's skin, when he was imprisoned in France, he said some very nasty things. And George Washington, to his credit, kept his cool.
Definitely.
He didn't write back. Well, he should have written Thomas Paine back because he could have freed him like that.
Yeah.
But he chose not to do that. And he basically, in a sense, and I'm going to say that George Washington left him to die in prison.
Yeah.
But he was James Monroe, who would become a future president of the United States, actually got him out of there and sort of nursed Paine back to health. But he was really never the same after that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I definitely wrote quite a few notes on Thomas Paine, especially during his time in imprisonment. He seemed to have been, I could refer to my notes, but he seemed to be a really emotional guy.
Yes.
That he was very driven by being conscientious and empathetic towards people.
Yes.
And it almost kind of relayed in his messages, where you would read a heavy sense of emotion. There's dread, right? There's like this anger. I don't think it's anything like hatred in any sense. Like, he always has like this room left on the table kind of talk.
That's a good way of putting
he wants to be very outspoken, like you said. I think there's this characteristic among very emotional people, and I can again relate.
Yeah.
That it's really hard to get the words out. There's almost like this Kanye thing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's really hard to get the words out. You
Right.
don't really know how to put it together. In your head, it's like artwork. It starts making sense. You're putting, you're putting things together. But as soon as you open your eyes and you start seeing people, it's like, whoa! Like, how do I put this down? So it sounds really, really kind of like crazy, I guess.
Right.
But in a sense, it is that kind of talk of leaving room on the table, because you don't want to completely let go of that. You have this emotional this distrust towards that person where you don't want to like him anymore because they screwed you over, right?
Yeah. And Thomas Paine lashed out. I mean, in my book, I document those are actual papers that you can go and look at for yourself. And he lashed out at George Washington on multiple occasions, and he basically just called him out. I mean, he really did. You basically all you had to do was say the word, and I would have been set free from prison. It was a terrible prison too. Thomas Paine got really sick in prison, and he nearly died there. Yeah. And like I said, I don't think he was ever the same after that. But he put together some works when he was in prison. That, like I said, got him in trouble.
Yeah. Was it Thomas Paine who had death walk by his door?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes, he did have death walk by his door.
Because I actually, it's pretty funny. I wanted to draw something because immediately I had this image in my head that I wanted to put on paper of Thomas sitting in his cell with the door slightly closed,
right,
and the markings on the wrong side of the door.
Correct.
You know, that's a modern day kind of miracle.
Yeah, it was
sense, right, and that's a crazy thing to happen to you, and almost, you know, he had no control over the situation, right?
And he didn't,
and I can't even imagine how to put together the emotions that you have when something like that occurs to you.
And
right in front of your eyes.
Right, and it in a sense it is miraculous. Payne had he had a horrible fever in prison, and essentially one of the people that was in prison with him asked the guard if they could open the door to just let fresh air come in.
Right.
And by him doing that, you know, they would mark with chalk each night the individual that was going to get decapitated, and Payne knew that it was coming. And fortunate for him, if you want to call it a miracle or whatever, that door was open, and when the chalk came by, he put it on the wrong side, and they walked right by Payne the next day. Now, Maximilian was one of the individuals that were responsible for putting Payne in prison. Coincidentally, shortly thereafter, he was killed, and his head was lopped off.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of justice there, because Payne really didn't do anything wrong, but he was sort of an instigator in a sense too. You know, he was a revolutionary in the sense that he believed in democracy, and he wanted all the countries to be free. He wanted to basically replicate what took place in America. He wanted that to take place in London. Well, when it didn't work in England and London, and Payne was essentially banished from there, he went to France and he tried it there, and unfortunately it didn't work there.
Yeah, but he had this really, I mean, now we use it as a phrase in today's culture of common sense, you know, alongside democracy. That,
right.
You know, that not necessarily that we're looking for this people pulling together for everybody, not this like communal upbringing, right? That there's still common sense.
Yes.
Right. That there are people who need to pick up the slack. That there are people who need to be open-minded and humble.
Right.
And also it's pretty interesting when he writes anonymously too.
Mm-hmm. And he wrote that anonymously against, you know, some of his contemporary people that lived among him. Even though he was doing it anonymous, he was infusing words into the text of that message in common sense that were bad things to say.
Yeah.
You know, revolution, democracy, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Got him in trouble.
Yeah. It's definitely what we're seeing today, but also this really historic, almost like the reel keeps spinning itself back around, where people get very, not fixated on their ideas, but there's a general culture.
Right.
And when something comes from the outside and threatens it, not necessarily in this like violent or aggressive way, but it's different. It might show some colors that seem like maybe they should be implemented in my religion. Maybe they seem more practical, right? Maybe this makes more sense, right? This is we could be a little bit more open-minded about things.
Yeah.
So that's also in a sense.
He was very open-minded.
Very open-minded. Very open-minded, and he wrote a lot. One
of the most beautiful. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off either, Tom.
Going.
One of the most beautiful things about Thomas Paine was the way that he wrote. He was an intellectual. He was a very intelligent man, although, you know, he had some adversaries like John Adams who didn't think so. But one of the greatest things about Thomas Paine was his ability to, going back to your thoughts, having those thoughts and putting those onto paper, where it wasn't just for the upper echelons or the intellectuals of the day to read and understand. He put everything in such plain, concise language that he appealed to all walks of life. And that's why when he wrote Common Sense, it was the greatest piece of literature on American soil at the time. It sold more copies. It dwarfed every other piece of literature up until its time.
I can't imagine being around in that era and something coming around that attacks your thoughts like that, right? Or maybe less attacks, but relates to your thoughts, because you could be living a whole life on your own with, around communities or cultures that are shaped a certain way. And obviously, children of all sorts are very susceptible to. Well, not susceptible. They're born into it, right? They're born into cultures that they may not could be completely on board with, or they're hesitant on, and they stick to it, and then you see this new wealth of ideas, and all of a sudden, your mind just expanded. It just blew up, essentially, right? Somebody else is thinking this. I can't.
It was. There was, the revolution, sort of the beginnings, and everything that sort of bubbled up to the surface later on. You had a lot of these great minds like these guys that were saying things that were very taboo. There were very taboo things to say during the time, and they knew that they were getting into a lot of trouble when they went against the King and the Crown of England. And Benjamin Franklin, he famously said, either we're going to all hang individually or we'll all hang together. And that's fortunately, we came out on the winning side of that and formed the greatest democracy in human history because of these men and women. There was a lot of, I don't ever want to diminish what a lot of the women did behind the scenes. In fact, I talk about some of them.
I wrote a ton about this.
Right.
I wrote probably more about the women than I did than Ben in this case, because holy shit, man, these women are tough chicks.
They were
so
extremely
tough. And not to mention this,
they weren't educated either.
They weren't educated. They're taking on debts. They're becoming financial managers to these guys. They're taking care of everything behind the scenes. And these guys are just fighting wars. However, they're living, maybe just a partial few, right? Whoever was around, maybe had a little bit more money, they were in a better position.
Right.
But a lot of them lived so close to 100 years old.
Yeah, they did.
Which is phenomenal. Not to mention some of these gentlemen in the book too that lived in their 80s, or
many of
their
them
wives lived up to close to their 90s. It's almost a disease aside, there's that's a different world.
That's a great way of putting it. And for people that might be listening, we're talking about a different world. We're talking about a world that if you and I were catapulted back into those days, honest to goodness, we probably wouldn't stand a chance.
Not even close. They'd probably shoot us.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, they were tough. They were gritty. They had to be.
Yeah.
If you wanted to survive, you absolutely had to be.
Yeah, and nobody was picking up the slack for you.
No. And I'm working on a second volume for this book right now, and I go to great lengths. One of the central figures in that volume 2 is John Adams, and I dedicate a lot of ink, if you will, want to call it that, to his wife Abigail, because John Adams never made a decision without consulting Abigail. She was an absolute genius, self-educated. She was a mother, a wife. I mean, she did it all. And she, man, my goodness. And Martha Watt. I mean, many, many, many of these women.
Yeah.
They did a lot of good things.
Who fascinated me a lot was, I think it was Benedict Arnold's wife.
Yeah. Peggy Shippen, yes.
She spent very, very little time with this man.
Right.
He was jumping in and out of battles.
Yep.
All the time. As soon as there's we got to fight, let's go.
Yep.
I'm in it. I'm the first one there.
He was a warrior.
He was insanely tough. And
yeah,
not to mention the Howe brothers. I mean, that's that's another level right there.
Yeah, it is.
But Benedict Arnold's wife, I mean,
very influential.
And she was an American, right?
She was. She was a loyalist.
Yeah.
Her family, they were loyalists. They lived in Philadelphia. And but Peggy Shippen was said to be one of the most beautiful women in all of the world. In fact, I think I might have 1 or 2 pictures of her in there. They probably don't do her the justice. But she was spoken of by Washington, by Hamilton. Everybody thought she was just absolutely beautiful. And she became quickly attached to Benedict Arnold because he was a very handsome fellow himself. And, he was sort of this, ruddy, rough and rugged soldier that walked with a limp, because of his battle wounds at Saratoga, and she was really attracted to that, but she loved him deeply. She really did.
Definitely.
She was a very good, honorable woman, and Benedict wasn't a very honorable man.
No, and it's pretty incredible. I mean,
she stood by him.
She stood by him, nowhere near him, which is amazing.
Yeah, a lot of those women did. A lot of them did.
Oh, man, it's really incredible. I really like the way that you put into perspective that it's a two-man show, right? It's not just this guy. There's behind. I mean, this is so tacky to always say, but behind a great man is always a great woman.
That's right.
I really can't see how that balance works any other way, right? I really believe in that.
I do too.
Something like Alexander Hamilton's wife.
Yeah.
The day that he got shot, how attached she was.
Yes. To him. And he had cheated on her. I don't know if I talked about this in the book, but he had a very ongoing, long affair with a lady by the name of Maria Reynolds. I don't think I actually talked about that in the book. Yeah. And he got busted, and he ended up coming clean on it. But he was paying off her husband hush money to keep things quiet. And that maybe even, I should have put that in the book. I should have went into some more depth on that. But Eliza, now I will say this about her, she was a very committed Christian woman. She loved God, she loved Jesus, stuff like that. Oh, hang on a second.
What's that?
Plane's coming over.
Oh, shoot.
You're not going to hear anything.
Yeah,
Sorry if you didn't catch
Field.
that. That is from Page, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, they come by sometimes.
But she stood by his side. She stood by her husband's side all the way to the end. She was there. One thing that when I wrote this book, when you talk about death, it can be sort of a morbid thing, depending on how you look at it. But it's a fact of life. It's part of nature. Everybody dies.
Yeah.
These people went through a lot.
They did.
They really did. As I do document in the book, their son Philip was killed in a duel by the same pistol on the same battlegrounds in Weehawken, New Jersey, that his father was killed at.
Yeah.
And but they witnessed all this blood and this carnage and the war and depression and
this is
poverty. I mean,
this is and all within a very short time frame,
right?
Which is, we're talking, the first thing that I definitely noticed reading into the book is that this is really not that long ago. And when you read that these, even if the war is going on for 10 years, 15 years, it may not seem like a lot to us now, but I mean, this is probably just people trying to be ignorant about it, but a lot of this stuff happened not that long ago. I mean, this is 3 people ago. If we want to consider Eliza being very old.
She was very old.
Very old.
Yeah.
And that was not that long ago.
No.
So when you imagine that these people are living in the situation where they're constantly getting ready to jump ship because there's going to be a war in your town. That's a crazy way to live.
It is. And you had to pick a side. Look, these were English colonies. These people considered themselves to be Englishmen. England at the time was a superpower. It was the most powerful nation on the globe. For sure the most powerful navy in the world. But you have these people that are living in the colonies and they're faced with a decision. Are we going to break free from the king in England? Or are we going to be a loyalist? Are we going to remain loyal? So really you have, when you think about the Revolutionary War, it's in fact a civil war. Because you've got people within the country fighting against each other, and then it becomes a global world war. England gets involved, and then you have France getting involved, and you have the Spanish getting involved.
Germans.
It's a world. Hessian Germans, yes, absolutely, yeah. This is a world war, and the fact that America won this, I'm sorry, this is a miracle.
It really is.
What they had for resources and the training of their soldiers, it's mind-boggling that they defeated the British. But Washington learned quick.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we'll talk much about Washington. One thing that I actually had a few people tell me about, Washington's the last chapter in the book. and it's not a very big chapter. And I've had a few people say, "Oh, you didn't talk a lot about Washington."
Yeah.
Well, when you read the whole book, Washington permeates almost all of the pages.
Right. Exactly.
So, for me to just, take one chapter and just talk all this stuff about Washington, when you read this book, Washington's everywhere. Because he was, the preemptive individual of the war.
That's kind of how I felt about the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Mm-hmm.
That everything was, everybody was very closely related to this incident, but
Yep.
Man, a book on Bunker Hill itself would be fantastic.
Well, there are some really good ones out there.
Because I'm trying to put together the pieces on my own, because I'm not, I wasn't, preparing myself historically. I guess before the book, I wasn't trying to keep up on dates, and like I said, a lot of the times when I read, it's into human nature.
Yep.
But that, there were many famous incidents that happened, when it comes to the Boston Tea Party,
right?
The Stamp Act, starting a whole riot of emotions of people.
Yes.
But the Battle of Bunker Hill, all these great men shared some taste of it.
Yeah, they did.
Right.
They did.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
It was a bloody battle. It was so basically, when you read the first chapter of the book, I open it up. It's really the only chronological part of the book, if you want to say that. And I kind of did that for a reason as well. But Thomas Gage was the acting commander-in-chief in America at the time. And I'm not going to go into tons of details about this, but there was sort of a cascade of things that led up to Bunker Hill, or as it should correctly be called, Breed's Hill. That's actually where the bulk of the battle took place. When the Americans retreated, they went back to Bunker Hill. But anyways, you had the British were on their way by this point. It was pretty much negotiations were off the table. So you had the British sending massive amounts of armies to sort of quell this rebellion that was really centralized in Massachusetts, in the New England area.
Right.
So you had John Burgoyne, Henry Clinton, and William Howe on board the Romulus. And they're sailing to America. And it's interesting, I talk about this in the book too. The Romulus is a Greek god that protected Hades.
Mm-hmm.
He stood at the gates of Hades.
Yeah.
And it's coincidental that it was 3 British generals that were there. But anyways, they were coming to replace Gage as well, because England by that time had felt that Gage had sort of let them down and failed them. But they're 3,000 miles away. They don't know what's going on.
Right.
And Howe comes to replace him. And when this battle sort of begins to manifest itself, the British, I think they sort of underestimate the spirit of the American will. And the Americans by this time weren't going to back down. Lexington, Concord had already taken place. Shot heard around the world was fired. But William Howe basically takes the lead of the British at Breed's Hill, and they make a charge up the hill to try and overtake the Americans. And it was, what general was it? He fought alongside Howe in the French Indian War. I'm having a brain lapse here.
Oops.
But anyways, Tom's like, we'll look in the book.
I wrote so many notes, man.
And I know him very well too, and for some reason I can't remember his name. But anyways, just aside from the fact of his name right now, he tells the Americans, boys, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah, I know exactly.
And the Americans do that. Now, they're able to stop 3 charges from the British. It's a bloodbath. Yeah. William Howe, mind you, very brave man, very respected by the Americans. He's in this. I mean, shots are going around him. Some of his captains are getting shot off their horses. He's standing there watching this whole thing. But they make 3 charges before they finally break a line off to the side, and they basically flank the Americans. And the Americans by that time were pretty much out of ammunition. When they ran out of ammunition, the British sort of seized on that. Henry Clinton was, doing some stuff on the scene as well. but they've also got protection from the British fleet, and they're bombarding Charlestown, all this stuff. But Howe and them finally get to the top of the hill, and they overtake the Americans. And the Americans saw this as a victory in the sense that they were able to inflict so much damage on the British, so many casualties, and the British were just furious because they're like, you were purposely taking out our captains, which was sort of a no-no. You didn't do that.
Yeah.
But this is war. The Americans were like, look,
Trying to
if we're gonna beat you, we're gonna have to do this guerrilla style, and they did. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. I go into a lot more detail about the battle in the book. So
Yeah, right. You know, it's funny that you talked about. We just spoke about the miracle of this actually coming to an end and us on top, right? The American Revolution winning, and a lot of this happened without any kind of naval support, right? You know, the Americans had absolutely zero until the very end.
Yeah.
Until the very end.
Right.
They didn't have a navy.
So that's what I was saying. George Washington learned quick. New York, it's a city of islands, and the British surrounded it. They had access to all the waterways. After Washington got his butt whooped, he learned that he was going to have to fight a protracted war, and he was going to have to bring this war inland. That was the only way that he knew that they could defeat the British.
Right.
Was essentially to outlast them. They couldn't go toe-to-toe with the British.
Yeah.
William Howe wiped the floor with Washington in New York, New Jersey. It wasn't until Trenton and Princeton when there was sort of a little bit of a shift of momentum that sort of captured the American spirit at that point in time.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about that. What do you think was the turn of the tide that caused that switch in the American spirit? Because that's probably not a very easy thing to do. Is
Right.
to essentially domesticate yourself on foreign land, right? You go through, this is probably a generational thing, and then it's also probably really hard to let go of your ideas and who brought you there, right?
Yeah.
Who's, the British did this for you. I mean, everything that the land that you kiss, the feet under your, or the ground under your feet is because of the king.
Right.
But what causes a people, right? Because it wasn't just a group of people. This was Americans just no, we're tired of this. Like, no, get out of here. What was that switch?
Well, I think about like the Vietnam War. It's difficult if you're an army that's coming in to someone's homeland to defeat them, because your home right here, this is your home, and you're going to defend it, and you're going to defend it with everything you've got. And that was sort of the American mentality. These British, they were hiring Hessians, mercenaries, all these people that come in. They had no dog in the hunt.
Yeah.
They're like, well, we just got to stop these guys. But when your house, you're in Washington, appealed to his men all the time on this level, he would ride up and down the ranks saying, don't forget your women, your children, your family, your homes, all of this. He goes, this is what you're fighting for. And if you do this, you'll defeat the British, and this will be your land, and nobody's going to take it away.
Yeah.
And that was the American spirit. And that's kind of the same thing with Vietnam. You don't go into a country like that and just start trying to take somebody's property.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well.
Definitely.
Doesn't matter how powerful you are.
Definitely, and that also goes to show a lot of respect towards Washington, because we, in our culture today, we see a lot of people who are very strong-willed and very strong-minded, but they don't really enact change. Like there's no movement because of it. Maybe there were some greats that we can remember, like Gandhi or Elvis or Michael Jackson. And these are people that historically brought everybody together on the same idea.
Yes.
Right? And to be somebody like Washington, this is a crazy situation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Everything that's going on, the whole concept of what was going on, trying to develop a new world.
Yes. It was.
I mean, it wasn't.
You're right.
It wasn't black and white. I'm sure
No.
there's a lot to it, right? And that's probably a whole nother discussion on its own. But it's a really crazy thing to navigate.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
So,
it certainly is.
To be somebody like Washington that can touch everybody with his voice on such a mass scale, and
yes,
he's not moving them. He's just talking sense to them. Right. Let's get back to that Thomas Paine. Common sense.
Right.
He's talking sense to these people. You know, do you want everything that your heart ever desired? Fight for this.
Yep. Fight for it. It's
even,
worth fighting
even if you're
for.
not fighting for it, right? Just, you know, it's a lot of strong will. To start going against your beliefs in this sense, right? And it's probably really strong will to even make the move to go into a new foreign land.
Yes.
And start a new life. I mean, my mom did it, and a lot of immigrants have done it. So
absolutely. That's
crazy,
a great point. Yes.
Yeah.
And you guys, you know, your mother and you coming from where you came from to a place like America, it seems to me that a lot of people that migrate here from different countries where maybe they had more difficult lives appreciate liberty and freedom and democracy so much more so than maybe somebody like myself that was born here, and you just don't know anything different. So
no, I think you could still equally
oh yeah, I think you can, yes.
Yeah,
but I think there's a much greater chance of someone like myself falling into the trap of, you know, taking things for granted.
But you've traveled.
Yeah.
So you've seen how it is, right?
Right.
You know, it's this is I mean, I try to remind myself constantly that you can do anything you want.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want in this country. If you're in this country and you wake up,
it's the beauty of it.
If you wake up in the morning or whenever you wake up and you just open your eyes and you're alive, you can do whatever you want.
Right. You can make something of yourself. Yeah. It's an opportunity.
Or you can do the complete opposite. I mean, you have every right to do it.
Yeah, and the forefathers, the founders of this country believed that. Yeah. They really did. I wanted to swing back to Washington real quick because, you know, you brought him up. You know, and I mentioned Washington riding up and down the line saying those things. That was very rare for him to do that, though. Washington was an individual of few words. Unless you knew George Washington really well, and I actually talk about a little story with his dog Vulcan, who takes Martha's prized ham. If you knew Washington well, he would laugh and he'd kid with you. But one of the things that he commanded attention because he didn't talk a lot. And Washington was a pretty imposing figure too. He was probably between 6'2" and 6'4". Super strong legs. He was known as the best horseman of his age. Wow. He was. Even Thomas Jefferson talks about that. But he didn't talk a lot. But when he did, people listened. And I mean, throughout Washington's entire life, there were times where people questioned his generalship. He wasn't the greatest general. He wasn't the smartest general. You know, he wasn't a lot of things. But Washington learned from his mistakes. And that's what, as people, even today, we need to do. Yeah. He didn't make the same mistake twice. Washington did. If you got him on something, he learned from it. Yeah. And another thing that Washington did that I think was brilliant too, and a lot of people don't do this today, is he consulted all of his generals. Yeah. He would bring in a group of people and consult them. Yeah. And even if his idea, which he would maybe think at the time was the best, if it was sort of overridden by a majority, he would go with what they said.
See a lot of humility in that.
Yeah, and one last thing. When George Washington made up his mind, that was it. That was it. If he made up his mind, he wasn't changing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's strong.
Mm-hmm. Just, I mean, if there's one individual, I mean, there's so many people I want to meet, would love to meet from the Revolutionary War. But he's the most intriguing figure by far. Yeah. For me.
I think after reading the book, I'd probably say Alexander Hamilton for me. You know, it's so funny. I can't remember what was going on this day, but I would read, there was a page of your book that I was reading, and I was just laughing my ass off.
Crap!
It was all on the concept of dueling. I was laughing my ass off on the whole entire, you know, you didn't go before you went into the specifics of how Aaron Burr and Alexander
Oh, yeah,
Hamilton
yeah.
got into their feuds, the situations behind each duel. I laughed so hard at the concept of dueling. The fact that
It's all about honor.
A couple of gentlemen can come up to each other. They can come fully loaded with
Yep.
the intent to kill each other, and then turn around and be like, "Let's talk about this."
Yeah, they could.
That's just
Yes.
hilarious to me. And I got comedy skits like
Yeah.
going through my head about this. You know?
You honestly, I mean, you
And then
can
one day
laugh
you get
about
shot
it.
in the chest. It's like, oh shit, what?
Yeah,
Come
what?
on, man.
Yeah.
We just talked about this.
It was interesting because a lot of duels, they weren't fatal. Most of them weren't fatal, but it was a form of honor, and it was keeping your honor intact. If somebody attacked you where you thought you were publicly humiliated, you wanted to defend your honor. And the way to do that was to challenge that individual to a duel. And like you said, most of the time, they would throw their shot. They wouldn't even fire, but they would get to where they were pointing at each other, and they would stop.
Yeah.
And then they would talk it
Discuss.
out, and they were good.
Yeah.
It was it.
And this could happen like with Hamilton and Burr on multiple occasions.
Right.
Where they were continuously meeting for a duel.
Yes.
A duel in which
Yes.
they were risking their lives.
Yep.
Not a discussion, right? They went against each other's honor in some sense.
Yeah.
And they kept going through this loop with each other. It was just so funny to me. And then on top of that, Alexander Hamilton, I also wrote down this. I mean, he got shot in the spine, and he just walks at home, and he's like, "Move out of the way, I'll be fine."
Yeah.
To his wife.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah, I mean, it's
what a story with that.
yeah,
guy.
it's interesting. Now, what I do in the book, I don't want to give it away for our audience that's watching, but I give two very opposing ideas of how these men came to their conclusions about the duel.
Yeah.
What did Hamilton think happened?
Mm-hmm.
What did Burr think happened? And Matthew Davis and some of the other people that were witnesses there.
Yeah.
And that's why I sort of created Tom.
Yeah.
I put him into the narrative.
I'm really glad you did, because I think that I think probably like you or anybody who's out there that just throws on Google and they're like, who was Alexander
Right.
Hamilton, right? They're only going to get a general sense of knowledge, and even if and this comes to that human nature aspect of things. What leads these guys? Like, what is going on in their heads at the last moment that something like this is happening? Because there's a lot going on.
There is.
It's not just on paper. It's just Burr shot Hamilton.
Right.
All right.
Or you go to the Hamilton show or whatever, which
That's
I've
it,
never
right?
seen.
Like,
And,
oh,
yeah.
okay, that's what happened.
Yeah.
But then it's like, wait, what was going on in their
Right.
heads? And you go in, you go in deep. You bring in Tom. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that aspect of it, because
Good.
like
I'm
I
glad
said,
you
you
did.
could just Google it and Burr shot Hamilton.
Yep.
And that's about it. But the story behind it is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I don't want to give anything away either.
No,
but
no.
I know you
We'll
won't
keep it
either.
low-key,
But
It
I think
was
it's
great.
exciting because I give a couple very unique perspectives. Now, they're not unique to me. It's not like I came up with these. This is just reading and research of what actually happened in that duel. And I talk about it in both stories. So
Yeah, and I think it's also maybe not totally crazy to say that a lot of these things, history repeats itself.
Yes,
so
it does.
it's a lot of these stories we can take into our own account, and it's not very far-fetched to come up with certain ideas like that, right?
It's not.
Because why wouldn't you also think the same things as these gentlemen did? They may have been
good point.
in a different time of their life as you, but and, a different culture altogether, a different humanity, right?
Right.
But they're all people at the end of the
Yes.
day. They all, they're all gonna say, "Holy shit! Why did this guy shoot me?" It's not gonna be
it's
like, "Oh shoot,
Yeah.
this is it." We're just gonna lay down and die in peace, like samurai.
right.
It's there's a lot going on there.
No, that's a good point, Tom. That's very perceptive on your end.
It's good to have a story behind that.
Yeah.
It definitely is, because a lot of people can relate to it.
Right.
Right, and that also brings us closer to these men.
Well, and it, by bringing Tom into, the center of it all, I wanted to make him objective.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a dog in the hunt.
Mm-hmm.
initially he didn't even know who these guys were.
Yeah.
He found out later, reading in the paper. He's like, oh yeah, he was literate. He could read and stuff. In the book I have him. But he saw it with his own eyes. He saw what happened.
Yeah.
So you've got people on Burr's side that say, no, he did this. And you've got people on the Hamilton side, no, he did this. Well, what does somebody that is completely oblivious to all this, what did they see?
Yeah.
How did they see the event unfold?
Yeah.
So
I think it's that also just I think that also clues people in on their own thought process, right? You have to think about both sides of the equation. You always try to look at the balance and see where the scale tips.
Right.
Weigh all options and see everything that's going on, and maybe not make conclusions, right? But just see the story.
Yeah.
See the story
Absolutely.
in every direction. Because
Absolutely.
you need to be thinking about everything in the sense. You have to be thinking on an empathetic level and an objective level.
Very perceptive. You do. You have to be empathetic.
Yeah.
To these individuals, and you've got to try and be objective as well, and think the way they did, empathize with them, sympathize, all of those things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's great to see that these men were this self-aware.
Yeah,
because
Agreed.
it also brings into that immigrant mentality. I mean, you have freedom now. I mean, you're in a new place. Nobody's looking over your shoulder.
It's amazing,
and we just need to cherish that.
We do.
We really
Tom,
need to.
So brilliant.
Yeah.
We do. We need to cherish it because it's the fabric of who we are as a society. Americans by nature are, we want our freedom, we want this, we want our independence, we want all. It's in the very fabric of who we are, and it is something that we need to cherish, and we need to understand, that you're always only one generation away from losing that.
Yeah.
It only takes one generation to forget about things of history and what happened and what took place and the sufferings and the tears, the blood, the sweat, the death, all those things. We can't ever take that for granted.
Definitely not, especially in a time where we're very exposed to it. These guys.
We are.
These guys lived through it physically, and we're living through it a little bit distant, but we're exposed to it at the same.
We are.
I guess almost not. Maybe more. A little bit more exposed than those guys were, because we see the whole world. We see the global world in that sense. But
world's much smaller now.
I mean, and that probably brings